let's talk about Europe. So European leaders today are telling Europe to prepare for war. French President Emmanuel Macron addressed Europe last night, saying that Europe will not accept capitulation of Ukraine to Russia under the guise of peace negotiations. So like peace negotiations where people don't die is a guise? Okay.
Yeah.
Fool me. Okay. And the Danish prime minister says, quote, peace in Ukraine is more dangerous than war in Ukraine. Like, Europe has gone absolutely mad. Those are the words of the warmongering Danish prime minister, Mette Frederiksen. Listen to her in her own words, and here it is subtitled.
I don't think we should panic, but I think we are in a hurry. And I think we have been in a hurry for 3 years, but now we really have to scale up and to speed up because Russia and Putin is not only threatening Ukraine, but all of us. And we have to be able to defend ourselves. My idea about Ukraine is the same as it has been now for 3 years, that they have to win this war. And if we allow Russia to win the war, I'm sorry to say it directly to all of you, he will continue and they will continue. And maybe we will even give them a better situation than today, because if we end this war now with some kind of a frozen conflict, a ceasefire, it will give Russia the possibility to return to Russia, to mobilize more funds, people, and maybe to attack another country in Europe.
Nobody pulled the microphone back and said, what proof do you have of that, given that Russia has specifically said they're not interested in any more than the contested regions that have been long since fired upon by Ukraine? So on what basis are you spewing these possibilities? Nobody is asking those questions. They're allowed to just say, he's coming for all of us, not based on any facts. I mean, this is a playbook from Orwell. This is 1984. Speak where peace means war and war means peace and death means life. There's no other way to see it.
Well, look at those microphones that are shoved in her face. I mean, Philip, if you can just show those microphones again and just play it without audio here, you can see Reuters, France 24. These are all. There's DW. These are all like these are all corporate media organizations. Al Jazeera. But you're not going to get any independent journalists asking those questions, because you're really. Independent journalism in Europe is not a thing. You have state-run media, basically. So that's what you have there. You're not going to get those answers. Elon Musk tweeted this. Then shortly after that, they want the forever war. How many more parents with no sons? How many more children with no fathers? By their logic, it never ends in Europe. So today is a huge day in Europe. European leaders coming together to hold an emergency summit over Ukraine, pushing for more war against Russia, while President Trump is pushing for peace right now. The cocaine-sniffing troll Zelensky, of course, was there in Brussels, of course, today to ask for more money, for more weapons, to thank them for not ending the war. Those were his words. The unelected leader of Europe, Ursula von der Leyen, was also on hand to tell us how important attacking Russia really is. And she announced the new Rearm Europe plan. Watch.
Europe faces a clear and present danger. And therefore, Europe has to be able to protect itself, to defend itself, as we have to put Ukraine in a position to protect itself and to push for a lasting and just peace. I present today to the leaders the Rearm Europe plan. The Rearm Europe plan provides up to 800 billion euros for defense investment. It gives the member states fiscal space to invest in defense. It gives the member states possibility to invest in the Ukrainian defense industry or to procure military capabilities that go right away to Ukraine.
Okay, notice what she said there. That was important. She said it gives all 27 European states the space to invest. Well, where do they get that money? Through debt. It's written in the plan. It specifically says that they can borrow the money in order to beef up their weapons supplies and their military. And in return, they get a pass in triggering the excessive deficit procedure. So they have a debt limit, too, that's set by the EU. And the EU is saying, screw that, take on as much debt as you need because we need to match the United States defense budget, which we have closing in on 900 billion. Now they're saying, because the euro's worth a bit more, we'll spend 800 billion and we will match them. They can't do it. They should learn from us because we had to go into debt in order to do it. And they're like, we like debt too. We can do that too. So who are they buying from? Who's going to make this money? This is not written out in their plan. Where are they going to buy it? Well, no. I mean, I suppose the World Bank, I don't know if that's really, we'll have to look into that.
Think about the amount of money that Ukraine is on the hook for in terms of monetary loans from the IMF and the World Bank. So just like Britain was after World War II, they were in debt to the United States up until about 6 years ago. Think about that. Since World War II, the amount of money that we let them use and through loans, through the IMF, through the World Bank, that's exactly what Europe has been doing now with loans to Ukraine. So they will be forever in debt to Europe. Zelensky's basically there mortgaging his house. He's like,
Yes, but she's asking individual member states. Think about Portugal, which is already so highly in debt. And she's saying, take on some more in order to take on this war we are telling you to go into. So if you're a Portuguese person, you don't have any choice. Your government is going to sink the value of your money and your hard-earned dollars in order to go into this war that has nothing to do with you. Yeah, that's what they're saying. That's the mandate that they are putting on every European citizen.
Mr. Vintage in our chat says, thank you for the $20 super chat, says all these leaders banging the drums for war probably have never, zero chance raising an army. Everyone knows a young Danish, British, French man is going to refuse to go and die on behalf of Ukraine and these EU clowns at the top.
But how? How can you resist them, Europeans? You don't resist them for anything else that they do to you, which is odious.
Yeah, I mean, 80% of all your decisions are run out of Brussels. So in Portugal, 80% of your government's decisions are handled by people like Ursula von der Leyen, these unelected globalists. Mm-hmm. In Germany, the same thing is true. So Europe can just destroy Germany's industrial base and they have nothing to say for it.
Well, they're allowing Ukrainians to be taken off the streets while they're going to their job as a dentist and thrown into the conscription. Does that mean that that's what Europe ordains? They let Ukraine do it. So I guess they're saying it's going to happen to you too, European men.
What about your sons? What about your sons and daughters? So that question was asked of Ursula von der Leyen herself in an interview just the other day. Or will, all these sons and daughters going to war? And Ursula was asked in German if she would allow her Kinder into battle, her kids into battle. And she just laughed and said, "Nein, of course not." So it was funny to her watch.
Und es wäre ein Auslandseinsatz notwendig, dann würden sie mitgehen müssen. Und ich würde genauso zittern und bangen wie jede andere Mutter.
Ist jemand bei der Bundeswehr von Ihren Kindern?
Nein.
Nein. I would never send my kids to war, but I'll send yours. Yours are fine to kill, but not my kids. No, of course not.
Well, if you live in the capital, in the Hunger Games, you don't fight the districts. You raise them up to do that for you.
That's exactly right. Remember, Ursula told us that the Russian military is in tatters. Remember, she told us this. We covered this at the time where she said that their Russian military was in tatters. They're using parts from washing machines in order to build their missiles. Where did that go? Where did that narrative go? I think that narrative went somewhere to die.
Oh, that's the exact same thing that Barack Obama said. Russia doesn't make anything. He said they're just a languishing country. I saw this today on X called Russophrenia, like the side-by-side narrative that Russia's super dangerous and can take over the world, and also that Russia is collapsing and hurting and terrible and a jalopy. Both things cannot be true, but they work for the narrative if you don't question them.
Yeah, watch this. So here's a look back.
Russian military is taking chips from dishwashers and refrigerators to fix their military hardware because there are no semiconductors anymore. Russia's industry is in tatters. Europe is ready to assume its responsibilities. Rearm Europe could mobilize close to 800 billion euros of defense expenditures for a safe and resilient Europe. We will, of course, continue working closely with our partners in NATO. This is a moment for Europe, and we are ready to step up.
All right. So That whole narrative was a sham.
Well, I love who was it? The woman we played at the Dutch woman who said, we've been in a hurry for 3 years, but now we're really in a hurry because Dad cut our credit cards.
Right.
Basically. Now we got to do it ourselves. We didn't think we had to before because Joe Biden had the purse and let us, do whatever we want. But now that Trump's got our credit cards and have been, our gold card was cut.
Well, he is the one cutting these cards right now. So President Trump is now cut off intelligence sharing with Ukraine. This was reported overnight in the Washington Post, and the BBC had it this way. Watch.
Donald Trump has ordered a pause in intelligence sharing with Ukraine as part of his suspension of military assistance to Kyiv. It's a move that could seriously affect Ukraine's ability to target Russian forces and to defend itself.
Yeah, just so you understand, they don't fire any missiles without the help of the United States. They don't track Russian forces. They don't launch HIMARS without the express use of American intelligence to launch all of it. So when Donald Trump cuts off your intelligence funnel, that means you can't target anything. Game over. According to the Washington Post, the sharing of intelligence, striking these targets, it's game over. So now you're shooting in the dark. And so when Putin thought that they would, end this war in like a few days or a few weeks, that's presupposing that you don't have the United States basically launching all of your missiles for you.
Right.
And putting all of your targets in place.
Yeah.
So Trump shut that off. Now, Zelensky's media TV hosts, are calling for the assassination of the United States president. So this is Vadim Karapak, who said, "Where is Harvey Oswald now when the country needs him so badly?" And more than one calling for the assassination of President Trump. So that's one of Zelensky's state-run media hosts. They're calling for the assassination of President Trump. So I guess Americans should feel emboldened. We want to send more money to these guys. It's unbelievable.
That's regime change. We're supposed to be against that collectively.
Calling for the assassination of President Trump. So Marco Rubio called this out and said something we've been saying on this show for years, which is that this is a proxy war, of course, that what is happening in Ukraine is Western countries coming into Ukraine and using it as a proxy war against Russia. We were labeled as Putin apologists and propagandists and smear campaigns against any independent media that said that. Now Marco Rubio on television, after going to mass, says it, and now suddenly now Fox News can say it? Watch.
It's been very clear from the beginning that President Trump views this as a protracted, stalemated conflict, and frankly, it's a proxy war between nuclear powers, the United States helping Ukraine and Russia. And it needs to come to an end. And no one has any idea or any plan to bring it to an end. The plan of the Ukrainians up to now and their allies on Capitol Hill and the people you talk to in other countries is, let's just keep giving them as much as they need for as long as it takes. That's not a strategy.
All right. He says it out loud. It's a proxy war. Now we have it in the flesh.
This was not his narrative since the start of the war. So I'm confused that all of a sudden he gets it. Yeah. But I'm glad that he did. Maybe he did some studying.
Way to go,
over
Marco.
the holidays.
He read a book.
Yeah.
He read a few books on the subject.
Did you see that Trump canceled or is canceling something like 240,000 Ukrainian visas from the United States?
No.
Yeah, this is unbelievable. So Trump planning on canceling legal status of 240,000 Ukrainians. 240,000 Ukrainians.
Who we encouraged to come here over the Biden administration. I mean, these are civilians. They have nothing to do with it. We allowed them to get in the front of the line, in front of refugees from South America and people who are trying to legitimately get refugee status. They were able to jump the line. They got all kinds of like crayons and nice clothing and host families and things like that. And so now we're going to treat them like this after giving them this whole "you're the main victims of the world" status. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay. Don't make friends. What does Jeffrey Sachs says? It's incredibly dangerous to become the friend of the United States.
Yeah. There's really only one video platform that allows full-on free speech, and that's our friends at Rumble, because free speech is under attack, but Rumble refuses to back down. We've always believed in empowering voices, no matter how unpopular. And now we're taking that fight to the next level. When major advertisers considered pulling their dollars, even brands like Dunkin' Donuts turned their backs, claiming Rumble had a right-wing culture. even though you can find tons of left-wing shows on Rumble, but that's all they said. But we're not here to fit into a mold. We're here to defend free expression. To strengthen this mission, we're excited to offer Rumble Premium, a completely ad-free experience with exclusive benefits for viewers and creators. You're going to find exclusive content from our friends like Russell Brand, Dr. Disrespect, the Timcast, Mug Club with Steven Crowder, and more. It's more than just a subscription. It's a stand for free speech. Your voice matters. Join Rumble Premium. Stick it to all of these censorship monkeys out there. For a limited time, you can get $10 off an annual plan using the promo code Redacted. Visit rumble.com/premium/redacted and claim your discount today. Together, we can turn the tide. Whether you join Rumble Premium or simply you just keep watching on Rumble, that's great. Your support helps keep free speech alive. Is Poland desperate and confused right now? Dare I say schizophrenic? On the one hand, they've prostituted themselves out of NATO, massive NATO bases in Poland, of course. Then on the other hand, they're sitting on the precipice of total destruction if NATO pushes Russia any further. And into a nuclear war? Poland will be wiped off the map. So there's like sort of a madness pervading the government of Poland right now. I found it very curious, the position of Poland's prime minister, Donald Tusk. He's doubling down and basically pushing for all-out war against Russia. He basically condemned on X the other day Trump's push for peace with Putin. Can you imagine condemning peace just because you want Ukraine to be wiped off the map?
I don't have to imagine. There's a whole contingency on X that is condemning peace talks. We are here. It exists. It's a crazy thing to observe.
One of the smartest men in Poland is a man by the name of Dr. Michael Krupa. And he's joining us right now, and he's bringing his brain and his insight to us from Warsaw, Poland. What time is it there right now, Dr. Krupa, in Warsaw?
It's currently 10:20 p.m. out here in Eastern Europe.
All right. So there's a madness that's floated through Poland, it seems like, over the past few years. You've been watching it very closely. You described it to me as desperation and confusion all wrapped in one. So what is happening in Poland right now, and where do you think Donald Tusk comes down on all of this, pushing more weapons and support to Ukraine, or will he go on the peace direction?
Well, I think Donald Tusk will go anywhere Brussels tells him to. And right now, the Brussels contingent, which is led by Ursula von der Leyen, is obviously on the side of war and more conflict and more bloodshed. Let's not forget that the European Union and Donald Tusk, along with the European Union, they basically sold their soul out to Joe Biden. I'm pretty sure they were all excited that, Kamala Harris might win the last elections in the United States, the presidential elections. And here we are, Donald Trump is president, and all of a sudden things are really changing. So it is a big difference from what was declared in the first Trump administration, where, we had the big words about getting along with Russia. But then, you had the neocons in and around Trump in the personnel that were screwing, unfortunately, much of what he tried to do, institute a new détente with Moscow. But this time around, because of the loyal people that Trump has around him, we're actually seeing results. And they're coming at a pretty fast pace. I have to say, I'm even surprised at how quickly the president has moved with his pro-peace agenda. The smackdown last Friday in the Oval Office was just, I think, one of the opening salvos of that. But going back to your question, Clayton, I think Tusk is going to get along. He's going to go along to get along. Now, the problem with the Polish political scene at this moment is not only were they not expecting Trump to move so quickly in the direction of a new modus vivendi with Moscow, but it seems that the official opposition, through the lips of its official presidential candidate today, one Karol Nawrocki, so the opposition party being Law and Justice, has stated that, Donald Tusk is stupid on Russia, but we should be even more stupider, because he said what we should do is we should sever diplomatic relations with Poland. So unfortunately, the craziness in Poland has gone sky high. But at the end of the day, they're going to have to succumb to one source of power, whether it comes from the United States or Europe, because we know that Europe, even as they say, without the American backstop, can do nothing vis-a-vis Russia.
I've been wondering if there was ever any way for them to save face and follow Donald Trump into a peace agreement, because they parroted the lines of the White House, the lies about the war in Ukraine, so faithfully. And so are they just in too deep? They're through the looking glass and they can't come back? And do you think that that's what the European people want? Because we're seeing madness out of Europe, but we should not fool ourselves that the people of Europe have this strong appetite to fight Russia.
Yeah, do the Polish people think that way?
No, of course not. No way in hell. And I think this goes hand in hand with the opinion of the vast majority of the public opinion in all the other 26 European Union countries, and also the countries in Europe that are not part of the EU. The thing is, I believe that the current establishment, so basically the two parts of the sort of solidarity revolution that came to power after 1989. So you have the liberals and you have the fake conservatives from Law and Justice. They have a real dilemma right now, because the entire existence of the Third Polish Republic and their entire political careers were based on the premise that we will always be anti-Russian. And anything that comes from the United States regarding Poland, regarding NATO, will always be directed against Russia. Well, surprise, surprise, it turns out that's not the case in this instance. And they're having a little bit of a dilemma, because they've invested so much moral capital, so much physical capital, so much propaganda, so much of their own personal honor in claiming that, first, Vladimir Putin is a dictator who's hell-bent on invading the rest of Europe once he takes care of Ukraine, that Volodymyr Zelensky is Winston Churchill, and that Ukraine is, an idyllic place of democracy and the rule of law. It's funny, because before we went on, I heard the commercial about the American pig meat that's being sold, not from China, and there was a statement that you made there, Clayton, that it's basically where a pig can feel free to be a pig. Well, when I think of that, I think of Ukraine automatically. And when I saw Zelensky at the White House, it's something that came to mind, because if you think of the corruption that country, that literally third world country, is swimming in, for anybody to say that is any viable alternative to what we have in Russia, with all its problems, obviously, is just total lunacy.
Let's talk about Donald Tusk, because, as you mentioned, he kind of goes where the wind blows him, right? And if you look at his previous prime ministership, what was he prime minister from 2007 to 2014? Forgive my Polish history, right? Then he took a little break. He had a siesta, and now he's back. Yeah. But back then, he was talking about aligning himself with Russia, maybe not aligning, but being friendlier. I'm just going to read... I want to read an old quote from him. I think this is from 2007 from Donald Tusk. It says, quote, "Although we have our own views on the situation in Russia, we want dialogue with Russia as it is. The lack of dialogue serves neither Poland nor Russia. It spoils the interests and reputation of both countries on the international arena. Therefore, I'm convinced that time for a positive change on the issue has just arrived." So what changed? It seems like he was ready to have a dialogue with Russia.
Well, the year, probably 2007. Yeah. Right? When warmongers John McCain decided that was unacceptable. So that was a pivotal year if it is 2007. But you answer. Go ahead.
He was truer words had never been spoken. I mean, if I were to put that quote to any, voter of the current regime, they would say, "Oh, that must be that must be Grzegorz Braun, for example, or some Russian agent." It's like, no, it's your own prime minister from 2007. It's like, what? So surprise, surprise. But no, I think what we have to understand is at that time, we were getting signals from the Obama administration that they were willing to, implement the so-called reset, which was obviously no reset at all. It was just a ploy to get Medvedev involved in sort of sidelining Putin in Russian politics. That didn't work, obviously. So Tusk at that time understood that since the Americans are opening up to Russia, we should go along, since we're, America's greatest ally in Eastern Europe. But right now, I'm actually pretty surprised, because the political diagnosis that I was putting out for a couple of weeks, and even just after Trump's election, was that this current government would want to keep the gravy train rolling in terms of NATO, in terms of more American troops in Poland, that they wouldn't dare stand up to Trump. But it turns out that the hatred that Tusk has for everything that President Trump represents in terms of this rebirth of American nationalism, in terms of putting your country first, in terms of sealing your border, in terms of saying, no, there is an American culture. We're all not globalists today. That's something that's anathema to Donald Tusk. And I think that hatred, coupled with what's happening in the European Union with the clowns that are currently governing in Brussels, and their hatred for everything that Donald Trump represents, I think convinced them that he's going to play his cards with the European Union. He's going to stick with Berlin and Brussels. But I fear that at the end of the day, when reality sinks in and those people or the people just after them, like, for example, the Alternative for Deutschland, Germany, begin serious talks with the Russians, we're going to be at the back of the line, and the Russians are going to forget about what we did for this situation to come about, what we as Poles did.
What happens if the U.S. leaves NATO? Seems like it's growing increasingly likely that Donald Trump will pull the United States out of NATO, pull out funding completely out of Ukraine. What happens to Poland if that happens?
Well, the surprising answer is nothing happens. Putin's not going to invade. I think we should be happy that foreign forces are going to be leaving Polish soil. No sovereigntist, no patriot wants foreign forces, even friendly forces as American forces, on our territory. I think the collapse of NATO, well, which will, obviously happen once the United States leaves the alliance, means that the most important cause of this war has basically been eliminated. So I think there's obviously going to be a lot of, I heard today that some former members of the Solidarity movement, I think along with like Valenza, they sent an open letter to Trump, accusing him of, kowtowing to Putin. And that reminds him of the old communist days and so on, and appeasement, blah, blah, blah. We know the whole repertoire. Obviously, I don't think that letter is going to reach the White House, and good that it's not going to reach the White House. But it's these old boomer clowns that think they're still relevant in Polish politics. But nothing will happen. I think it'll give Europe breathing space to do what President Macron, out of all people, has been talking about for many, many years now, about regaining European independence in the sense of nation states creating an entity that's powerful but still retaining their independence, but not being subject to the whims of Washington and American hegemony. So that can only bring good fruits to the old continent. And I'm hoping that in a couple of months, we will see the United States, if not quicker, because I'm seeing the vibes on Twitter right now, on X, that there's a serious push for the United States to leave NATO.
Right. Well, that's an interesting way to think about the trajectory of the European Union, because on X, I also see a lot of hyperbole saying, oh my gosh, if we leave NATO, the United States, that's the collapse of the European Union. And the European Union, that the current leaders don't have the people of Europe and their best interest at heart. But perhaps there is a movement that could, in fact, bring the EU into a more positive body. So I appreciate that take. Mike Krupa, thank you so much for joining us, for staying up late from Poland. We really appreciate your analysis always.
One of the smartest men in Poland. Thank you, Dr. Mike Krupa.
Thank you, guys.
I hope everyone pays attention to you in Poland. Be a safer world. Thank you, Doc. Great to see you. Bunker has been a great sponsor for Redacted. They are having tremendous growth right now, and I want to tell you about them today. High net worth families, law enforcement agents, professional athletes, tactical response trainers trust Bunker to protect their lives from surveillance, cyber criminals, and other threats. Join them, and here's what you get. Bunker is an uncompromised private messenger together with a password manager, secure vault, notes that work seamlessly together. They have a password manager, notes, all of it in one. And it works in over 130 countries. Bunker customers enjoy peace of mind, travel with greater ease, and more energy to focus on what matters most. So download Bunker now from the App Store, Play Store, or visit their website. Just go to bunker.life and use the code REDACTED to get 25% off. Live life to the fullest. Protect what matters most. Download Bunker today, bunker.life, and get 25% off when you use the code REDACTED at checkout.
Okay, well, warmongers will have to work extra hard to stamp out dissent in Europe now that European leaders are all in on supporting Ukraine for a full-blown war with Russia. A few weeks ago, Vice President J.D. Vance criticized Europe for suppressing free speech. Well, Germany and the UK have doubled down on doing just that. In Germany, the government has launched an advice center for those who think that a family member or a friend has spread conspiracy theories. This is how you know what? You've got a crazy uncle who believes that Ukraine started the war. Tell the government, we're going to help you out. Stasi is on it. And in the UK, the Prime Minister signed a 100-year agreement to support Ukraine. And guess what? A big part of that agreement is to combat misinformation and propaganda and implement, look at number 4, joint media initiatives to make sure that the media is promoting the war to their liking. So what does this tell you? Expect more propaganda, expect less dissent, or at least more punished dissent. Joining us to discuss from Austria is Ralf Schollhammer. He's the host of the Hammer Time Show on YouTube. He is going to speak the truth from Europe while it is still allowed.
And one of the smartest people in Austria. The smartest person in Austria.
Well,
Ralf, good to see you.
Some people will say that's not a very hard bar to meet, but I'll take the compliment.
All right, so you're still allowed right now to speak the truth, but what happens if you get reported, maybe you shouldn't cross the border to Germany? Tell us about this initiative.
I mean, this is scary stuff. Because it always comes under the cloak of, we are trying to help people. As you said this before, usually in the United States, every Thanksgiving, you have these articles about how to speak to your racist uncle at the dinner table. And now in Germany, they more or less have how to report your insane uncle, to the authorities when they spread conspiracy theories. And the fun part, or the sad part, is this is initiated by the Interior Minister, but it is run by 3 NGOs. And those 3 NGOs are very well known for being very, very far to the left. What I find so remarkable, also the things that you said previously, all of this is out in the open. That's what I always find. Remember, 5-6 years ago, when you would have had the conversation that we are having right now, they would have said, you guys are spreading conspiracy theories. But now all of this is out in the open. They have lost any shame. And that's the worrisome part also with the war in Ukraine. Can you imagine if you give European leaders warlike emergency powers? They won't be able to save the European economy or actually make a war industry, but they sure as hell can crack down on free speech and expression and dissemination of information and opinion. That's a really worrisome trend.
So Natalie asked the question earlier, should we expect more propaganda? I mean, is that what we're setting ourselves up for? They say that they're trying to save us, preventing misinformation and disinformation to protect you. But it seems like we're about to see a lot more BS, a lot more paid for state media propaganda.
Well, I'm a little bit hopeful because what you saw happening with the election of Donald Trump is that the big social media companies, at least for now, have shifted gears and sided with Trump on the pushback against European censorship regimes, against the idea of the Digital Services Act, which is just a technical term for censorship through the back door. And as long as that is going on, since Europeans don't really have alternatives in the social media realm, there are some, it's a small French company, there's a small Polish company. Somebody recently published a list and said, if you want to be truly independent of the United States, switch to those companies, switch to those apps. I've never heard about these apps. I don't think anybody has outside of whoever sent this tweet. So I'm quite hopeful that the Europeans will not be able to do it. But even the initiative, right? The trend is the problematic thing because the United States is going to have elections again in 3 years. And if you get somebody like Kamala Harris or Joe Biden 2.0, then this trend can accelerate once again. So this is a worrisome trend. And the European people, I have to admit, are a little bit too sanguine about this. Even the so-called deep state stuff, again, 5 years ago, using the term deep state made you a conspiracy theorist. And now pretty much everybody accepts that it exists.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned these NGOs. I thought automatically when I read these initiatives, I thought, well, this is something that USAID or the U.S. State Department would normally pay for. We have in copious amounts in the last decade or more. So who are the remaining NGOs that still have money without U.S. support to do this?
Oh, this is a great story. I mean, I have to admit, I might be sometimes seem a little bit too enthusiastic about Donald Trump, but some of the things he did will have lasting effect. And one of them is what you just said, the uncovering of the government NGO complex, right? Which is basically a slush fund that ran directly from the government to the NGOs and was an outsourcing of things that usually were considered to be within the realm of the government, of the state. And they just put it somewhere else because then they could say, we have no responsibility. This is not really something that we have under control. The same was true in Germany. They made a law just a couple of years ago, which they called the Democracy Support Law. And the only purpose of this law was to secure the financing of left-wing NGOs outside of parliament. So because they said, well, these NGOs, they cannot really plan for the future because their funding is insecure. So how about it? We put it into law and say that for 5, 6, 10 years, they will be funded by the government. And even if somebody else is in power, of course, here the fear was that this would be the AfD. They cannot cut the funding. So there was a deliberate attempt by the government in Germany to create, let's say, a shadow government outside of the state that could then continue to do what it did, whether it's in the realm of the information, of the propaganda, you name it, and could not be definanced, if you want, from the government. So this was kind of a very, very odd stuff that was going on. And I think this is, of course, what we see all over the place in Europe is what is being attempted in many places is to ensure that elections no longer have consequences. That you create an NGO complex that then can operate, it's taxpayer funded, you operate it in a way that even if, Le Pen in France, the AfD in Germany, Reform in the UK, even if they would come into government, right, they still would have to wrestle with that NGO complex that they can do nothing against because the previous government created a legal system that makes them almost unassailable.
So I want to ask you, because it's amazing right now. It seems like the will of the people in Europe, if you listen to all of these warmongers and these leaders in Europe, that they're all like pro going to nuclear war with Russia. You ask the average Portuguese on the street, like, is that the case? Because it seems like the voice of the European people has been completely drowned out in this situation by Brussels, by these unelected European globalists right now. They're not listening to the people. Do the people of Europe want to go to war with Russia?
No, I don't think so. And there are some exceptions, but the further you go from Spain towards the east, I always say that Poland somewhat plays a more exceptional role there because also with their historical relations that they have with Russia, they tend to be more belligerent in that sense. But in Germany, we constantly hear that the AfD is pro-Russian, which is, of course, a ridiculous argument. Not wanting to go to war is not the same as being pro-Russian. I think it's a very sensible position. But even within the Social Democrats, even within the Conservative Party, if you ask the people, nobody really is in favor of military action. But this is the sad thing, which is that these ideas can take on a life of their own. So as you correctly pointed out, if van der Leyen goes out there and says, nothing is off the table, or Justin Trudeau, when he says nothing is off the table, people shrug it off. But those are very dangerous things to say. And in a sense, and this is something you also alluded to, it almost seems as if there's a willingness to escalate this to a point where there is no return. And if you look at what happened over the last couple of days, what Trump was suggesting was actually quite clever with this whole mineral deal thing. He was saying, okay, we get American businesses into Ukraine, we create a tripwire through the back door for the Russians. It's not a real security guarantee, but it's kind of an implicit security guarantee, because if you look at the actual commercial value of rare earth in Ukraine, they are very limited. The United States don't need Ukraine for their rare earth, but the idea was to say, we're not going to get you into NATO, we're not going to send troops, we're going to signal to the Russians in the sense that, listen, Donbass, Crimea, there's probably not much we can do about this, but then there are limits. So this was a very shrewd thing to do, but as you guys correctly pointed out, for whatever reason, Zelensky didn't take it because, as so often, he talked to the very people we mentioned often on the show, the Victoria Nulands, the Susan Rices, or another personal favorite of mine, John Bolton, right? I mean, there never was a war that these people didn't like, and apparently it seems now that this is the next one.
Right. Now, one of the things in speaking to Europeans, they say is, yes, we absolutely value free speech, but it's not a foundational part of our existence the way it is for Americans. Article 11 of the European Charter guarantees freedom of expression and pluralism of the media, meaning you expect pluralistic viewpoints. It's supposed to be allowed. So why are Europeans so sanguine about this?
Well, because a lot of it has been done in a somewhat shrewd way. So yeah, there's freedom of the media, so you can say what you want. But the way in which they influence the playing field of freedom of speech and freedom of opinion is that you have the public broadcasters like the BBC, the German public broadcasters, the Austrian public broadcasters, and they have a very specific left-wing bias, but they are taxpayer funded. Now, then you have a public media or public-private media that is funded by the government. That I would say that's part of the NGO complex. And there it's the same thing. If Redacted would go to the German government or the Austrian government and say, hey, we have a really successful podcast, we have a really great YouTube show, is there some funding? Is there some public support for that? You would not get a dime. If you would, however, be a left-wing pro-Brussels media outlet, you would get a significant amount of money either from Vienna, from Berlin, from Brussels, or someone else. So the idea is everybody can say what they want, but if you say what we want you to say, there is money in it. And then thereby, of course, you tilt the playing field, you tilt the competition, if you want, in a very specific direction. And this is exactly what's happening. So you're free to say what you want on paper, but it's very hard to execute in practice.
We're proud to announce here at Redacted our brand new show called the Ursula von der Leyen Hour. It's just it's a full show, and an Olaf Scholz Hour follows at 7 p.m. That's our new lineup here, where it's just a back-to-back where you get Ursula von der Leyen, she has the floor, and then Olaf Scholz after that.
And we'll have it translated into French for our Canadian viewers.
Yeah, I mean, we're very open to all of that. Exactly.
What happened to your camera?
Yeah, but this is what we saw happening.
When Clayton said that, his camera was like, nope.
Yeah, my camera went off. I shut off.
That was so funny.
Olaf Scholz, stop messing with my camera.
Yeah. But that's what happened during the German election campaign. We talked about this on your show before. I mean, if you look, this was always my favorite example, when they had these town halls with German politicians, and then it turned out that all these average Germans in the town hall that were interrogating the AfD politicians were, for example, members of the Green Party. And first of all, these mistakes always only happen in one direction. And the other thing is, if it happens once, okay, fine. If it happens twice or three times, as it was the case in Germany, you know that it's not a coincidence. So this is trying again to tilt the playing field and to influence, of course, the outcome of an election. And ultimately, they were successful because 20% for the AfD was not enough to have the kind of course correction that Germany would have needed.
Yeah.
Ralph Schulhammer, the smartest man in Austria. And
thank you so much,
it's almost
Ralph.
11 p.m. there in Austria. So thank you so much, Ralph. As always, for your insights into the madness that is the censorship industrial complex in Europe. Thank you, Ralph. Great to see you, my friend.
Thank you, guys. See you next week, hopefully.